Welcome to the session on Myth to Reality. What is the potential of humanitarian innovative financing for localization? The session at 2 p.m. is always a difficult session because maybe you all had lunch and you're tired and you would like to go outside. But this is why we have actually a panel of 6 speakers to make it drastically interesting, and I'm sure you will not regret that you're here today. Like I said, my name is Björn Hoffmann. I am the Senior Advisor in the Grand Bargain Secretariat and very happy to moderate today's discussion. Across the humanitarian sector, there is definitely a growing interest in innovative financing. As traditional grant funding becomes much more constrained, we are seeing an increased attention to tools such as blended finance, impact investment, Islamic finance, digital finance, and social enterprise models. Within the Grand Bargain, this interest has led to the creation of a so-called community of practice on humanitarian innovative finance. And clearly, the demand for learning on the topic is rapidly growing. At the same time, an important question remains: how much of this promise is becoming a reality, especially for local and national NGOs working in fragile and conflict-affected contexts? While innovative finance is often presented as a potential new source of funding for humanitarian action, many local actors still face significant barriers in accessing these instruments. The gap between the ambition and the practical application can therefore be quite wide. In today's discussion, we aim to move beyond the theory. We want to explore what is actually working, for whom, and under what conditions. We will hear concrete experiences from practitioners and experts working with different innovative financing approaches and reflect, hopefully honestly, on both the opportunities and the limitations. In particular, we will look at how local and national organizations can benefit from these financing models and what role donors, international organizations, and the private sector can play in enabling greater progress. Our goal today is not only to highlight promising examples, but also to contribute to a more realistic and practical conversation about the role that innovative finance can play as part of a broader localization agenda, because that link has not always been done in the past. Our panel today, as Elise already has said, is part of a series of events focused on innovative finance, organized in this HNPW Community Day. The first session this morning looked at how local and national NGOs are navigating the current humanitarian financing shifts. But this session takes the conversation further by taking an in-depth look at the potential of innovative finance for locally led humanitarian action. With that, I would like to introduce our excellent panel of speakers. First, to my left, is Juan Kuderke. Juan is a former ICRC humanitarian leader who pioneered innovative finance initiatives, including the sector's first humanitarian impact bond, and now serves as the senior advisor on innovative finance, this is now a long title, to the Red Cross and Red Crescent Movement's Humanitarian Innovative Financing Hub. I think it's the HIF Hub, right? We're calling it the HIF Hub. So Juan is definitely a true believer in the transformational power of innovative finance. That is what I noticed when talking to him before the panel. He thinks we just need to do it. Then I think we're hopefully joined online by Claude Al-Arashi. Claude is the localization program coordinator at the Yemen Family Care Association, where she works with local organizations and donors to strengthen locally led humanitarian responses and advance more sustainable and innovative funding approaches. Claude, can I just check if you're with us, please?
Yes, I'm here and I can hear you loud and clear. Over.
Super. Thank you very much, Claude. Then I would also like to introduce online Achille Lokusu-Dailande. Achille is a senior WASH officer with the IFRC with nearly 20 years of Red Cross experience, working on major WASH programs in West Africa and exploring innovative finance mechanisms for the sector. Achille, I was told that you really do believe in the transformational power of innovative financing, and it's certainly replicable. I hope that is correct and that you can hear us.
Yes, I'm hearing you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Achille. Then I would like to introduce also to my left, Laurent Saxt. Laurent is an urban wash specialist with the IFRC who develops blended finance approaches for urban water and sanitation programs, working together with Achille, drawing on more than 15 years of experience across NGOs, the UN, and the private sector. And Laurent knows from his experience how hard it can actually be to make innovative financing work. Then, to my right, I'm very pleased to introduce Tenke Soltani. Tenke is UNDP's Senior Thematic Debt Advisor, leading a global portfolio of thematic debt insurances exceeding $30 billion and bringing over 15 years of experience in sustainable and impact financing. Tenke focuses on making innovative financing actually mobilize capital and not just appear in conference speeches. Now, this is a tall order for a panel at a conference, but I hope it's still going to be useful. And then to my right, I would like to introduce to you Matthew Truscott. Matt leads Oxfam's engagement with the UN and member states here in Geneva on a range of policy issues, including local humanitarian leadership, humanitarian system reform, and international humanitarian law. He has worked in human rights and humanitarian policy for over a decade. And Matt, before this panel, described himself as an optimistic skeptic regarding innovative financing, but you told me you stand ready to be convinced. So we'll see what this panel can do in order to advance this. Before we actually start with the first round of questions, I would like to have a quick round of hands. Who in this room would consider themselves as an expert in humanitarian innovative financing? Can you please show your hand if you consider yourself to be an expert? That is great. We have 3. That means there is a huge potential for others to become an expert through this panel. And Juan, I think we need to kick off with you because you can help us hopefully demystify innovative humanitarian financing or humanitarian innovative financing. You also can explain to us the order. What do we need to understand actually to be able to discuss if and how it could be interesting for local and national actors? Juan, over to you to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sheila, can you maybe show the slides, please? So indeed, as Bjorn indicated, I have a long career with the ICRC. I now work for the Humanitarian Innovative Finance Hub, which is a Red Crescent movement initiative to promote innovative finance. So that also means very specifically that we continue supporting institutions like the ICRC, the IFRC, but at the heart of our mandate is to support innovative finance for national societies of the Red Cross. So the conversation around localization and the fact that we have our colleagues Laurent and Achille from the IFRC and Itokolis Red Cross is very much at the heart of what we do. On my end, yes, I have 30 years in working in humanitarian contexts, humanitarian operations in conflict environments, and the last 10 years of those working around innovative finance, testing many different approaches in innovative finance. I would like to appeal, before I start demystifying, if I can pull it off, I would like to to appeal to what I call the nuance principle. Innovative finance takes many forms. It applies in different ways to different partners in different contexts. So what may be valid for an organization like the ICRC may be very different for, say, for Oxfam, for the Danish Refugee Council, or the Near East Foundation. And that is just fine. Yeah. What I'm also saying is that there is nuance in innovative finance as there is in finance, and that there is not just one recipe book that can be applied everywhere. Context is critical. And I also have to say up front, before we go into the key messages, that it is also up to the actor, humanitarian actor, whether it be international or local, to decide if they want to be involved in innovative finance or not, and why. But I do recommend, particularly in the current context, and I'm sure we'll come back to that, that this is a decision about the future of the organization. All right, next slide, please. Yes. So let me focus on a few key messages as we get started. And I have 4 key messages, yeah, about which we'll keep coming back during the conversation today, I'm sure. I think there is key message number 0, which is innovative finance represents new ways of working. Yeah, in different ways. I'm sure we'll go into it in more detail, but if you think that innovative finance is just a different way of doing fundraising, I think for the most part, again, the nuance principle, for the most part, that is not the way to go, or the way to think. All right. So key message number one is that contrary to what most people would believe in the humanitarian ecosystem, I want to underline that humanitarian innovative finance is already very localized. Yeah. If you look at, for example, the from the ICRC perspective, we've been testing and then replicating a series of what we call humanitarian blended finance approaches in urban water infrastructure. You will notice that I'm speaking about the ICRC and I say we. Yeah. I mean, it's almost 30 years. So even if my contract has ended and I still work for them, I still say we. Anyway, at the center of this humanitarian blended finance urban water projects is concessional finance flowing from development actors to host governments. That basically means that the lion's share of the project falls on the host government, who's going to pay back for it through, or at least for a part of it, through taxes. If you look at projects focusing on livelihoods, through better access to financial services, to credit, microcredit, for local, micro, small and medium enterprises, well, by definition, it is localized, yeah? And you're actually starting by thinking of beneficiaries, quote unquote, as actually economic actors that can generate income and actually pay back the loans that they're going to get from, say, a blended finance transaction. So you can look at it in different ways, but humanitarian innovative finance is already strongly localized in many of its forms. My second key message is that local and national actors, I mean, international humanitarian actors, international NGOs, but also local national NGOs and social actors can engage in humanitarian innovative finance through partnerships, teaming up with other actors. And by the way, this is absolutely central. If a humanitarian actor is not teaming up with other actors from other sectors, there's no innovative finance. It's just not going to happen. Like 99% of the time. So humanitarian actors, local or international, can engage in humanitarian innovative finance through partnerships and differentiated and realistic roles. I'll speak about the roles in more detail in a second, but what is also critical is for humanitarian actors to stay very close to something you do very well and for which you have a very strong track record. If you don't bring a very important value add to the conversation, then why would others team up with you? And how are you enable a potential humanitarian blended finance transaction? So your track record on the given thematic substance of the project is absolutely central. Third key message is that humanitarian innovative finance does require a minimum of institutional capacity. Yeah, we can cover that in more detail afterwards. And again, as I was saying in the introduction, moving beyond grant-only models is a strategic question about future readiness and sustainability. Because again, innovative finance is much more than just a different way of doing fundraising. Sheila, next slide, please. Very briefly, what is the difference between the usual way of doing business for humanitarian actors and humanitarian innovative finance models? Again, I'll keep it brief, but our traditional model as humanitarians is we get a donor, a grant from a donor as a humanitarian actor, we spend it, we generate impact. Humanitarian innovative finance models, again, the nuance principle, but say 80–90% of the time is going to be about a humanitarian actor getting some money from a donor to actually engage in collective problem solving with a number of other actors. Yeah, those partners, those other actors are going to be host governments, development institutions, private sector, local social actors, other humanitarians. Not all of those all the time. Yeah, it will depend on the project, on the context, on the thematic approach, etc. But it is humanitarian innovative finance is about collectively coming together to collectively solve a problem, blending different types of resources, grants, and capital and capacities. And of course, this should lead to additional impact, additionality of resources for people affected, and additionalities of efficiencies. Sheila, final slide. Stop with this. My introduction. Again, I wanted to come back to the four roles that humanitarian actors can play. If we go back to the experience of the ICRC, we started innovative finance with the humanitarian impact bond. It was difficult, technically challenging, technically, it took a lot of effort. Yeah, it was a big push, and we actually heard from people in the ecosystem saying, you're starting with something that is particularly complex. Are you sure you want to do that? Well, we did it anyway, yeah? But then the question is, did we replicate it? In our case, no, we didn't. We replicated other types of models. And what we have seen is that not just from our experience, but from the experience of other actors, humanitarian actors in the ecosystem, be they local or international, is that humanitarian actors tend to have four roles in innovative finance transaction. It is about the initiating, the convening, the bringing the actors together. It's about providing technical assistance, either related to communities or to specific technical issues. It's about initiating investments that bring the projects to investability by other actors like development actors or private sector. And it's also about the implementer, meaning actually implementing a part of the project. Finally, and I stop with this, I hope that we're on the road to demystifying a little bit what innovative finance is and is not, is that, again, innovative finance is not out of reach for smaller NGOs or for local national actors, but they need to, you need to stay close to your mandate, to your track record, have a very clear idea of what your value is. I think there's potentially more, but I see clearly two angles. One is around engaging with your government and multilateral development banks, for example, around sanitation. Another one is about engaging with local private sector and development finance institutions, for example, around microfinance and livelihoods. And either for A or for B, it can also be very useful to get support from other humanitarian actors and or donors. And finally, there's a minimum of institutional capacity that is needed in order to get started, and a vision for the future when it comes to, who as an organization do you want to be 5-10 years down the road? I think that is a very, very important part of the conversation.
Thank you very much, Juan, for kicking us off. And I think I like your notion of a road to demystifying. I think the whole panel will be about demystifying innovative financing. I think it's time that we also hear from a very practical example of how this has been put in practice. Because my understanding, Achille and then Laurent, is that the Togolese Red Cross and together with the IFRC have actually embraced this new way of working, wanting to do things differently, and embarked on innovative financing. So we're going to hear from Achille and then Laurent about how this is being structured, how does this construct actually look like, this partnership construct, and what made it work? And then maybe to Laurent, because I understand Achille is kicking us off, is what was the role in IFRC to actually make it work? So maybe Achille, over to you first, please.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I don't know if you can see me, but because of lack of internet, I think I will go it without camera if you want. Let me present briefly the context so I can come back to the model and then we'll go through the key enablers, change, and then results. As we know that, as you said, a local and national NGOs struggle to access the diverse and sustainable funding streaming, and traditional humanitarian fund cannot meet infrastructure challenges. So in Togo, in 2020, only 19% of households have access to safety water, and then less than 10% have access to sanitation managed safety, and 45% of our population practice open defecation. And that concept is very difficult for us as a local NGO to face all this challenge. So in 2023, the government of Togo discussed with is, ISDB. ISDB is Islamic Bank, Development Bank, and then he secure for the 14 million as concessional loans from them, and then as part of these loans, Togolese governments gave 4 million to Togolese Red Cross through IFLC to manage or to lead a sanitation implementation of on this project. So if you can I can summarize myself. A model of your humanitarian blending finance in Togo is stake on sovereign loans plus and humanitarian grants who can help our population to have a long-term access to sanitation and development impact. So Togolese Red Cross is a first national society to be involved in that kind of blending finance in Africa, and his role is very put on the implementation partner. His role is implementation partner. So he's Togolese Red Cross in charge to operate or to realize sanitation facilities in health centers, in school, in public space, and in a household level. If I can target the key enablers who make all this a reality, is first a strong auxiliary role Togolese Red Cross play in Togo with a long collaboration partnership with government since 2004. We have implement a WASH project with the government, and all work we do at this moment 20 years ago stay sustainable. So yes, we have the trust from the government that Togolese Red Cross is capable to conduct a long-term project. So it's a first enabler we have to mention. The second one is a volunteers network. So we have a robust community proximity in the here in Togo. So we are known that as a volunteer network, a robust community practice, and then we are known that a trust structure who can be a good partner with a government. The challenge I can mention here is the coordination gap. You know, it's very difficult to discuss with or to work with a government as we have a difficult. Yes, we have some delay from government to realize their infrastructure. So they have in charge for example, to build or to conduct water aspect of this project, and we are in charge for sanitation, and we have to go together. So if one, as a government, don't achieve quickly his parts of the project, is very difficult for the other one or for us to be at the level. As a result, we completely fulfill all latrine construction in sanitation, in health centers, and now we are on ways to finalize the construction of latrine in public space. So we have also create an income generation model as latrine caretakers and sludge management. And then for the last result, I can say that Togolese Red Cross is well known at this moment as a trusted development partners. So I give a floor to Laurent to complete what we did in this WATS project with ISDB. Thank you.
So the role of the International Federation in all this structure was first that they had a pre-existing global framework agreement with the Islamic Development Bank, so that facilitate a lot the work, because usually all what you don't see when there is a program implementation, all this background work, and that was one thing. Then the second thing, the FRC was also chosen to channel the grants from the government to the Togolese Red Cross. That makes also a financial trust structure. And globally, so basically it means this is an institutional bridge between the development bank and the local actor, in this case, the Togolese Red Cross. So as we saw before with Juan, it means that the FRC has the role in this case of an enabler. Mentioning those four roles that you listed before, not each program will have those four roles, but in this case, the IFRC has the role of the enabler and also a role of an advisor, because the IFRC is also providing, I say is because the program is ongoing, so they also provide technical support to the Togolese Red Cross. So that's the main roles of the IFRC in this program.
Thank you very much, Gilles and Laurent. I very much hear the importance of the partnership and the trust that is required to be able to do the joint problem solving that you mentioned, Juan. Matt, with this, let me turn to you. With the question, we've now heard this example from Togo. But in your view, are we overselling the potential of humanitarian innovative financing? Are we overestimating the potential that it has? We didn't yet discuss replicability of the model, but yeah, are we having too high expectations, especially for local and national actors, Matt?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think the Togo example is a great example, and so it's difficult to come in as a skeptic after good examples like that. So I might be straw manning some of the arguments in terms of innovative finance, but hopefully it makes for a bit of debate on the panel. I think one of my concerns with it is when you find the right mechanism in the right circumstances, it's fantastic, and that's what we see with some of these examples. My worry with innovative financing, in terms of if we talk about overselling it, is that if it becomes too popular, it becomes easy for it to be a political tool that you want to apply everywhere, all at once, in every circumstance. And I think really we need to take a slightly different approach, where we first need to understand the problem that we're trying to solve, and then work back and find the modality that will meet that problem. So not to roll out big modalities that sound good in conferences everywhere and hope that they stick, but actually work from the other way, from the ground up. And I think that's kind of incumbent on the local humanitarian leadership approach. It's part of how that works. I think also it's a challenging time for the sector. Right? I mean, the crash last year, hundreds and thousands of people died, and they died needlessly. They died because funding that should have been there wasn't there. And that's a solution. That's a problem we have to find a solution to, right? We can't have that carrying on. And so when you have the promise of things like innovative financing, and I know when I speak to people higher up and they hear the word financing in any context, eyes light up, because that's the key problem we're trying to solve. I think one of the challenges for that is that we need to look at what money we've lost and what money different types of innovative financing bring in. And it's not always the same money, it's not the same type of money, and it's not always going to meet the same needs. So I think there's a political narrative that I think is quite popular to say that the private sector can meet everything. The private sector can do a lot, but it can't do everything, and it's not going to meet the needs that were left vacant by a lot of the money that was pulled out last year. And I'm particularly worried if we start measuring how we meet humanitarian needs by looking at returns on investment. I'm not saying that's happening everywhere, but I think there's a political narrative that would go in that favor. As Oxfam, I think we've had some really successful innovative financing projects. And of course, you know, as we were saying earlier, there's a lot of discussion on what innovative financing actually is. So for us, for instance, cash or anticipatory action programs we've had in the Philippines, I think have been really innovative. I think some of the projects we've had in Kenya linking government funds and blended finance have been quite effective with outcome-based finance. So each of these has been a specific tool in a specific context, but I don't think it works everywhere. And I think the challenge when we talk about innovative financing is it can come across as quite a good marketing term because it encompasses so much that it can sometimes seem like a bit of a silver bullet that will fix all of our problems. It sounds like magic money in the wrong terms. And of course it isn't that, it's much more nuanced. And I think Juan mentioned this, that nuance is so important that we have to look at it and understand the pros and cons of each tool. Because tools used in the wrong context can be dangerous. I was reading a paper that Oxfam wrote almost a decade ago, where it was warning of some of these risks. And I think I can quote it actually. It says, if blended finance is done wrong, it can divert aid, it can privilege lower risk contexts and donor country companies, it can weaken transparency, accountability, and country ownership. Now, of course, it doesn't do that in every aspect, but we have to be aware that there are risks there if we're applying it incorrectly. I think also, and as a little bit as Juan mentioned in the start, it's also a bit about how we talk about humanitarian crises. So some of the examples that we use from Oxfam are talking about Kenya and the Philippines. These, of course, are countries with significant infrastructure. They've got quite well-developed finance sectors. You can have an engagement with the finance sector in those countries that is worlds away from the conversations you could have, for instance, in Sudan. But when you have discussions on humanitarian response and innovative finance, it's easy to see that overlapping all of them. So I think it's about finding the right tool for the right circumstance and understanding that humanitarian aid runs such a wide gambit of how responses happen, where you're engaging with government, what that sort of look like. So maybe to some extent, it's been a bit of a victim of its own success, right? Innovative finance has built up this brand over decades. And now we have to look at it and go, all right, people are getting on board with it. How do we make sure that it's done carefully and done correctly? And maybe that's a little bit on the humanitarian sector. It's been tough to sell people who are used to looking at donor log frames on working out how to engage with the private sector. What is blended finance? What are capital markets? What does that even mean? So now that we've finally got people up to speed on that, now we're starting to get into the nuances. I also think we need to look at the fact that the private sector does have different incentives to us. I think we all want to help people. I've worked with some fantastic private sector organizations, really are driven to make a difference, really are driven to help. But there's a profit margin to be sought there. I remember as a young little lawyer, I started taking on a bunch of pro bono free legal cases. And I was really enjoying it and providing free legal services until the senior partner called me into his office and he said, well, we're looking at your client list. It's excellent. It's growing. You've taken some interesting cases. There are some interesting deals going forward, but they don't seem to be paying us any money. And I mean, that was completely true. I was really enjoying the pro bono work, but there is a profit margin there. And so the law firm was willing to let me do some work on a free basis, but in the end it had to generate money or it had to generate marketing or something that added to that narrative. And so I do think we need to understand that there are different incentives and the questions of incentives come into it. I also think in some places where we're launching humanitarian responses, it's just not a great place to invest. That is naturally going to be the circumstance. I think some of the services we're providing aren't services that should be privatized, and we need to be careful of that. And I think there shouldn't be profit from some of that. So when we're looking at that and then taking that into a local humanitarian leadership model, I think we've got to carry those lessons into it. And as Oxfam, our goal is very much to hand power to local organizations, to have them taking the decisions to take leadership in those spaces. And sometimes that works brilliantly with the private sector. I think there's been some really good examples with small and medium-sized enterprises with using private sector in many of these countries that we're working with. But I think we also have to realize the private sector can have different perspectives on power, and coming back into that aspect of it. And so we have to be a little bit careful what we're setting up. And when we are playing that role as bridge or linking local organizations to the corporate sector, we need to look at what that does in terms of the power structures. I think we need to ask ourselves, are we handing power still to local organizations? Or are we handing power to companies when we should be handing it to, for instance, local government? So those are some of the questions. So I think, I mean, as you said in the intro, I'm an optimistic skeptic. I think innovative finance is an amazing toolbox. I think it's a crucial one. And I think if used correctly, it can have a massive impact. But I do think we have to push back a little bit on this political narrative that it's a way to solve all of the problems. And actually, we don't need to fund aid budgets in the same way because the private sector will come in. I think there's room for both and we have to do both.
Thank you, Matt, for flagging some of the important risks. I would like to turn to Claude online and hear from you in Yemen. Juan has said essentially it's a decision from every humanitarian actor of how they would want to engage in innovative humanitarian financing. And I believe you have taken this decision. So what would need to happen to make it actually work for you at a greater scale? And maybe how have you reflected on some of the risks that Matt had just shared with us? Claude, over to you, please.
Thank you. Please confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, thank you. Loud and clear.
That's great. I'm really impressed to hear from Oxfam and Juan as well, different perspectives, different practices in their countries globally. I mean, when it comes to Yemen, it's a bit different because some of the things that they have mentioned already has been established in Yemen in terms of engaging the communities in the designing of the programs, engaging community committees, CSOs, the grassroots CSOs, in terms of partnering for finding solutions and take it into practice. And this is the practice that we are already taking in Yemen when it comes to working with communities and serving them for the most, vulnerable communities. However, when we talk about innovative financing, we always think of the higher level connection and partnership when it comes to donors and CSOs in Yemen. The context in Yemen has proven that during the fragile political context, CSOs has taken place and handling most of the work and support even the authorities and the government and doing most of the humanitarian work. While in other contexts, you will find us, moving from development, those organizations that was rooted in development, such as YFCA, for example, from where I work, has suddenly find itself that it has to work through humanitarian funds and deliver assistance to the communities in need through different modalities. So I'm here today just to share with you some thoughts, some experience, and some practices that we have been involved in. And ideas for innovative funding that we think we should, advocate for more and share learning with other contexts. I would start with the idea of multi-year funding. So we have a context that is fragile and needs support and basically emergency assistance. But when you think of multi-year funding in a different way, for example, through consortiums, you deliver assistance at the same time for different, areas, districts, governorates, those who are in need with full support. The multi-year funding helps those CSOs to sustain, to help them, cover their operational capacities, to sustain for their communities, to continue delivering the assistance required. So the multi-year funding usually experienced in Yemen through consortiums. which is something really great, that a back donor is funding local partners through an intermediate, like international NGOs. So this practice has been proven that it is a success in Yemen, and communities are very engaged, communities are very satisfied. But when we think further to support leadership for local implementing partners to commit to localization principles, we can mention the piloting that we are currently in, which is the Local Lead Consortium. It is basically a local organizations shaping a consortium funded by the MFA, the MFA through the Dutch Relief Alliance. It gave us basically a chance to prove that we have the capacity to lead consortiums, to ensure transparency, to ensure accountability in place, to ensure risk management through shaping different technical working groups under this consortium, and lead it through a local organization and deliver the assistance to the communities in need where needed. And it also helped us experiencing some decision making, because when it comes to the crisis modifier, for example, responding to emergencies and disasters, the decision under such consortiums is taking, the lead is taken by local implementing partners, which is making it faster in decision making, less decentralization, and more assistance delivered to the communities. And the last example I would like to mention is our own hospital that I'm proud of having. It was established in 2020, in 2002, and was fully established in 2004. It was funded by the British Community Fund, the government of Japan, and the Arab Gulf Program for Development. Those were the good days when we used to work under development, which is something really I miss, because I'm a new joiner for YFCA, and I still nowadays only working for humanitarian, and I would like to talk about that more perhaps later on, just to emphasize that the hospital is it's like a micro businesses that support the sustainability of our association. It basically now stands by its own. It's delivering assistance to the most communities in need when it comes to women and children support. I don't want to take longer time, but feel free, please, to add a question, compliment, whatever you feel needed. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much, Claude, for your contribution. I hear you said at the very beginning, innovative financing, when we think about it, we always think about it as high level. But maybe this the panel is also an opportunity to say that, how would, what would we need to think about innovative financing to make it more concrete? Or is that actually a barrier for local and national actors, that we think it's so abstract, it's so high level that, maybe that's a question for the second round. But before we get there, I would like to go to over to you, Tenke. We're always calling it humanitarian innovative financing. But I have the impression also, when we're thinking about a hospital, actually, when we're talking and looking at it in more detail, I see actually we're talking about innovative financing or tools, different tools, Matt, that you've alluded to, being used in humanitarian contexts. It is very much essentially linked to the non-humanitarian actors, to non-humanitarian financing, to development actors and banks and the private sector, Matt, that you had mentioned. So can innovative financing bring these actors and resources actually closer together to jointly advance localization? And by the way, when developing this question, I was very proud not to use the word nexus, but that's what it essentially, I think, is. But thank you, over to you.
Yes, sure, and I'd love to. Yes.
Claude, this is a question for Tinka. We're having a second round in a minute. Yeah?
All right, go ahead.
Thank you. Happy for you to then come in. Thank you.
She sounded very disappointed. No, I hope I can answer the question well. And I would love to come back to Matthew's point as well on blended finance in the second round. But at UNDP, and specifically through the Crisis Bureau, there are two structural factors that we think really influence the resilience of communities in conflict-affected settings. Those are a functioning domestic private sector and then fiscal space for governments to respond to shocks. And then I'll answer your question in a roundabout way a little bit. Because as you mentioned in the introduction, I'm managing our thematic debt portfolio. So a little bit biased in how I answer the question, because if we look at the upstream component of this, we're really helping governments to create that fiscal space and enable them with financial instruments. And debt has been one that indeed is at a nexus of bringing usually international banks alongside local banks with entities like the UN and others, and then of course with the government. So we're usually working with sovereigns. And the reason that this upstream component works is one, it's often used to help create that fiscal space, either through restructuring or refinancing existing debt, or find opportunities, of course, for financing new infrastructure tends to be the most popular, but also increasingly using this in conflict affected settings. I would say not immediate crises because it's very difficult to deploy debt in that context, but to address longer term challenges, be it humanitarian or development. So hopefully answering a little bit to Claude's point as well around the need for development again, not just crisis management. So specifically, if we think about a recent example where we're engaged, it's in Nigeria. Here, there are really myriad conflicts. What we're doing is trying to talk to both the private sector that is interested in potentially issuing debt, so either on the corporate side or in the financial institution space, and then as well having a seat at the table when it comes to Nigeria, who's announced interest in issuing new green or potentially thematic sukuk, so with some sort of an SDG component embedded. Here we see a really strong entry point to addressing many of the points that are already discussed today as part of the use of proceeds. So we're trying to influence politically the discussions. Also, ultimately, it's a great PR play at the end of the day to say we're addressing our SDGs, we're addressing specific conflicts, and we're being sustainable in terms of our debt management. So we think that upstream component is a very strong one in answering your question. At the same time, I can bring a couple of different examples in Ethiopia and Somalia. Midstream, we're trying to enable pipeline development, help financial institutions and intermediaries, and then downstream is directly maybe that catalytic grant or other components at the local, the community level, maybe the lending level when it comes to SMEs. So it's segmented to really address the full financing value chain. But let me stop there, see if that's more or less answered it, and if not, happy to bring some additional examples.
Thank you, Tenke, for starting us off on this one. I think maybe, yes, do dive a little bit more into what does it mean a little bit different streams and how you indeed are engaged with a very large number of factors that are beyond the scope of traditional humanitarian actors, please.
Sure, and I also can't claim that these are necessarily innovative. So I'm not an innovation fan. I think there's great financing instruments that we can apply that work in one context, we can apply it to another. I mean, maybe actually then I just contradicted myself because in Juan's definition, anyway, okay. So if we talk about, I can talk about Somalia and Ethiopia briefly. So Somalia specifically, we're touching here more on the midstream and to some extent the downstream as well. We're looking at localization in terms of really financing local businesses in crisis affected communities. So in one example, it's 500,000 IDPs that are being supported, I would say, both directly and indirectly through UNDP, through an SME financing component where we are working with, again, a nexus of actors. So here, state chamber of commerce, along with a local bank. So it's the International Bank of Somalia. The goal here is really, I mean, if I tell you the numbers, it's going to seem small, but in the Somali context, I think it's quite significant and something that can be replicated. So on the one hand, identifying viable SMEs that can support ultimately the ability to pay back over time, benefit from grant financing as well as lending, and at a relatively low interest rate. So I would say about 6%, which is much better than they're going to have access to from more commercial loans, or actually can't even have access to those loans. And then UNDP comes in through a technical assistance component, which, okay, everybody might yawn, but it's still the bread and butter of the institution at the end of the day and is absolutely essential for building these business capabilities. So everything from financial management to whether it's setting up back office, providing just the skills you need to operate a business successfully, and then of course give them access, the tools also to access financing. So I will actually mention the numbers because the program is relatively young, but it's 9 SMEs supported with about $350,000. So the loans right now are in the $30,000 to $50,000 range that are being repaid in 2 to 3 years. So I would say that's also quite attractive. The interest rate I mentioned is about 6%, and it's under a Sharia compliant structure as well. So it's not a traditional lending model, but it is Sharia compliant. And at the same time, we've enabled industries across from its pharma, agriculture, tailoring, hospitality. So it's been quite diverse already. And then the job component is one that we haven't talked about the specific impacts created or that we're trying to enable, but I think this is part of the agenda. I mean, going forward as far as we can see. Certainly it's what the American money wants to see, but I think the Europeans increasingly as well want to see job creation as central to these interventions. And at the SME level, we can certainly claim that. So I think it's been about 150 jobs created, the majority of which have gone indeed to IDPs who have been employed. So 64% of the jobs, almost, I would say, are we at the majority women? Not majority women yet, but 68 of those have been women, and the businesses are already generating revenues of about 200,000. So going from the very macro to the micro, but I think this is really the nexus of what you've addressed.
Thank you very much, Tinke. So I hope this first round gave us a very good overview about the different modalities, the risks, the requirements, the different actors and roles that humanitarian actors can play. We're going to have a very short second round in which the panel members do have the possibility to also respond to each other what they've heard before we opening up to the questions from the floor and maybe from the chat online. So if you already do have a question, you can already start thinking about it. Colleagues, really quick in the second round. Juan, there is one actor missing in our panel, and that's the donors. I know you do talk a lot with some of the more traditional humanitarian donors. When you do discuss with them, how what kind of questions do they approach you? Do you think there is going to be a huge interest among donors now to rapidly scale innovative financing? And if so, how?
Thank you for the question. That is a very important question. And if I may provide some additional anecdotal evidence, a few weeks ago, we completed the 4th edition of the IMD program on driving innovative finance. I counted 5 or 6 participants in the room, just to say. And we had about 80 participants in total. I think we had 1 from a donor government. And I think that gives, opposed to a very significant representation from humanitarian actors, foundations, some development institutions, and the like. So that gives you a bit of an indication in terms of, there's an issue there. In our experience, we wouldn't have succeeded without the support of a limited number of very supportive donors. Yeah. Look, I don't want to put a finger on different places, but for example, for the impact bond, FCDO, DFI at the time was a critical partner, as was Switzerland and Belgium. For driving innovative for humanitarian blended finance in the water sector, we had support from a number of development actors. But what I would say, what I see is that humanitarian organizations are much more advanced in terms of pushing the envelope when it comes to innovative finance than humanitarian donors globally. And clearly we would need, there would be at least 3-4 things that donors could do to move the needle. I think one takes us back to the slide I presented earlier around the traditional model, the grant model, and the innovative finance model. Yeah. So a first step would be understanding that humanitarian grants not only serve to generate humanitarian input, they can also serve to catalyze development, host government, private sector, local private sector capacity and investment. Yeah, and this is critical. Therefore, generating more impact for less money. Yeah, so I think that's the first point. The second point is that they can provide seed funding for humanitarian doctors to experiment, to generate pipeline, to replicate models that already work, to hire people who understand finance. They can support with convening at barely no cost to themselves. Yeah. For example, in DRC, ICRC and UNICEF have done significant amount of work to mobilize partners from different sectors behind master plans for water in a number of cities in DRC. But we always kind of have to request donor support. They should be leading. Yeah, and they can lead with the convening at the country level, That's very, very important, because then you can create coalitions around very specific projects on the ground. Thematic conversations around, okay, we see that a number of organizations have been doing innovative finance in the water sector. What have we learned? How we do accelerate the implementation? And last but not least, donors sit on the boards of the major development actors. Is the same money, actually. It's ODA money, so they can also influence how the development actors team up with humanitarian actors, particularly in fragile settings. My hope, maybe if I can just 10 seconds on that point, is what I see now is that still there's a pretty limited number of humanitarian donors that are willing to engage and engaging. But I hope that that is enough to create more movement and therefore more replication and more donors coming on board.
Thank you, Juan. I'm sure you would also have a lot to say to what Matt had shared about some of the risks, but maybe that's even a different panel. Achille and then Laurent, I would like to turn one more time to you. Replicability is something you mentioned, Juan. Are there any plans to replicate the successful model that you've described with the Togo Red Cross in other countries? How easy do you think that would be? Achille, over to you first, and then you, Laurent.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to share with all national society or NGOs or local NGOs that innovative finance is accessible when the right enabler exists. That's very important. And then our case shows also that it's very important to clarify and to define a role of everyone as national society, like auxiliary role must be very clear. And we also need the multi-years planning and capacity to meet development finance standards. That's very important. About the replicability, yes, at this moment, Togolese Red Cross is working with Agricultural Ministry and then ISDB to develop a project, a new project. It's about 63 million euro project. So, and then in that case, Togo's Red Cross directly, not with IFRC, can have to lead 6,000 dollars or euro to do sanitation, water facilities, and so it's very important that if we have a strong relationship with government, yes, it's very possible to replicate our model in other national society. We have another project now in pipeline, but I can give a floor to Laurent to share it with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Achille. Maybe just to add of the example that gave Achille for this new ISDB project, what is interesting is also we had this first program that is ongoing now, and in the new program, maybe the IFRC is not anymore needed. Maybe there can be a direct link between the SDB and the local actor, in this case, the Togolese Red Cross, which is really what we are looking for so when there is replication. So just to add on that. And then indeed there is a new program we are working on. So it's with another development funding actor. So it's the OPEC fund. And in this case, what is an added value for the IFRC is like, because we have some experience, we know a bit what to do, even if the funder is different. So that's on the right step. It's not basically we have had a lot of work between us, the government, and also the technical counterpart, which is the water operator in Togo, and we are hoping to sign the final agreement within a few months from now. So that's really two concrete examples, one with the same development bank, one with another within the country, and all this is because of the experience we've had and the positive results.
So the ideas are there to replicate what you've learned. I think we've identified at the beginning there is a clear desire for learning to be shared. I think those panels and those events also do help to share and spread learning about it, and maybe help other organizations also to replicate what you have done. Matt, if I turn one more time to you now, we've heard essentially that all actors within a partnership need to be open to make innovative financing work for local and national actors. I think that came through from several interventions. You also mentioned that Oxfam has been doing some work on this, but how are you envisages for Oxfam to go further? What's Oxfam going to do in the future to be ready to really embrace innovative financing more strongly?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest answer, I think, on a small scale is sometimes NGOs like Oxfam just need to get out of the way. I think some of the innovative finance we talk about when you're looking at Islamic financing, or when you're looking at things like remittances or crowd financing, which I know has been talked about a bit, often the local actors are far better placed to be leading on those than NGOs or large organizations. So in some of that, it's just stepping back from that space and supporting as best we can. And then I think it depends a little bit when you're talking about innovative financing, what we mean. I think we've seen that on the panel today in terms of the size and scale that you get through in innovative financing. When I'm sitting next to UNDP and they mention that this might be a small example, and I always wonder what's coming up because it's usually 7 times our budget. But I think it does depend on how we look at that. And so some of the things that Oxfam is doing, obviously on a much smaller scale, that we find quite effective is, for instance, small local projects like locally led emergency response funds or locally led pooled funds. Funding that gets fast, flexible, reliable funding directly to local and national NGOs. And I think that's got to be the key that we're looking for in terms of what the outcome is. In terms of what kind of role Oxfam and other NGOs can play in that, I think part of it is sort of managing those fundings. And I think Achille mentioned a little bit of that, of kind of playing that connector role. I think that's particularly important. I think making sure that we're letting local organizations make those decisions. So we're connecting them to the discussions, to the funding, but we're also making sure that they're in the front seat with making those decisions. And then I think also reducing bureaucratic friction for a lot of those processes. Sometimes we have a bit of the back office, we can take up some of that and speed that along. And then also, we've got other quite nice sort of smaller modalities like group cash transfers is one that we've experimented a bit with, which is working with organizations that aren't necessarily registered, either because legally they can't be or because they're too small or just developing, giving them sort of group cash transfers that they're able to get going, develop as organizations, I think can be quite innovative. I think one of the other things, of course, is sort of linking them with those investment opportunities, providing a bit of the due diligence behind it. I think money can look very attractive. We can play a bit of that role of saying, be careful or look at how this is going to work, see how it's going to affect you. And then, of course, connecting up with local enterprise. I think one of the roles that NGOs can play quite usefully is that those places where we have to be on both feet, where you have to be sort of one foot being able to connect in DC or New York or Brussels or Geneva, and the other being there with local organizations on the ground in some of these localities and being able to merge those two conversations. I think that's quite an important role for us. And then the other one, I suppose, is doing advocacy a bit in donor capitals and how we engage with donors. I think that's an important role for NGOs. I think part of that is protecting humanitarian development financing in times where funding is being cut and looking at what's appropriate or inappropriate when working with private actors, making sure that this doesn't become a replacement for traditional development aid, so pushing back against a little bit of that. But I think really the priority for us needs to be getting local organizations funding as directly as possible and making sure that it's flexible and predictable. And our goal as NGOs is finding whatever mechanism works best for that. We've got this whole toolbox to work with across the spectrum of, yes, it's the nexus. I mean, it always comes down to the nexus, but finding those tools and then putting partnership first, finding what they need, and then getting them the right tools to do that.
Thank you, Matt. That very much aligns with the 4 roles that Juan had outlined at the very beginning that a humanitarian organization can decide for himself to play. Yeah? I heard you say convener, facilitator. Claude, if I turn to you one more time online, if you would now want to embark much more strongly on the innovative humanitarian financing track and seek possibilities for you, would you know where to go? Would you know how to approach your partners in Yemen to be able to leverage that much more? Over to you, Claude.
Thank you. And I think Oxfam has conquered it all because those practices has been experienced in Yemen. And what we're looking now is to motivate donors for direct funding, and more advocacy on that part would be amazing, because the issue is not with the capacity of the local organizations. The issue is with the architecture of the funding system itself. So we need support from those high-level decision makers to overcome the challenges and seek opportunities to enhance and support localization in Yemen. That would be my support and advocacy for the next steps. Thank you, and over.
Thank you. I hear you loud and clear. So you're saying that the capacity is not an issue of the local and national actors, but indeed conversation needs to happen between the different partners. Tenke, maybe the last question of this round to you. UNDP, I imagine, is going to stay engaged around innovative humanitarian financing. What are some of your plans of how you're trying to expand that portfolio? Maybe also how are you trying to bring other UN agencies along with you? Because I do hear that you're probably at the forefront of this.
It's probably over my pay grade to answer that question specifically, but I can answer a related question about how we're approaching the space and bringing more actors in, and we're doing that primarily through a political or policy-led entry point, and that is one that does engage. So yesterday we were actually on a call with another UN agency about a very specific context, again for Nigeria. So there is that element of partnership, but fundamentally we're trying to link national financing reform, so INFFs that many of you may be familiar with community-led recovery. And in Ethiopia specifically, we have now this integrated sustainable financing strategy, so an EISFS under the INFF. But suffice to say, the idea is to have a country-led financing program that's tied to the SDGs. And to do this, it's not UNDP alone. It's engaging the actors we've discussed, certainly engaging other UN agencies and hopefully other donors, and most often other donors within that context. And again, we haven't talked about governance today, but it's central to how we're implementing programming. So here, trying to, again, put together not UNDP-led, but local actor-led governance committees or governance structures that make sense, and then complementing those with extensive stakeholder consultations, reform actions that are coming out of this planning, and then influencing from policy level all the way down to financing, and then helping the country to secure whatever those financing tools are that are required. So UNDP-led, but certainly in partnership with other agencies and other actors, and hopefully some of you in the room today.
And very much also at the country level, I hear, right? Okay, with this, that was the second round that we had.